All right.
Never had a real job.
That's a real job. Yeah.
Now, are you guys seeing this?
We just see him glassing.
Yeah, I guess I have to switch out and then bring this up by itself. Now, are you seeing the longboard criteria?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'll let you guys go. Now you can start.
So I'll go ahead and just read this off, and then we can go over all the little details and nuances. So the longboard criteria. A surfer must perform controlled maneuvers in a critical section of the wave, utilizing the entire board and wave using traditional longboard surfing. The surfer who performs this to the highest degree of difficulty with the most style, flow, and grace will receive the highest score for a ride. And this is what we look at. Judges analyze the following elements when scoring waves: nose riding and rail surfing, critical section of the wave, variety, speed, power, and flow, commitment, control, and footwork. So with that being said, let's get into nose riding and rail surfing. So Brando, we talk about this stuff a lot. So nose riding, we when we're judging some of the events we have, especially some of the amateur events, we notice sometimes people don't get to the nose and so on. And I really wanted to talk about that and some of the critical spots of nose riding, where that is in the pocket, the board lifting and levitating instead of falling down as somebody's on the nose and riding straight to the beach in the mushy section. And how do we break those scores down? And what are we really truly looking at in those kind of arenas? And Michelle, if you do have picks, just pop up some nose riding.
I would say the biggest thing right off the bat that we look at judging wise is if the toes are actually curled over the nose in a hang 5 position, or if they're off the nose even by a couple inches, 6 inches. We want to see those toes wrapped over the nose, completely wrapped over. Positioning on the wave really amounts to a lot. We want to see in a critical spot, right in the pocket, not out on the flats. And like Dave was saying, it's nice to see a little air under the nose of the board, a little levitation and some lift when you're on the nose. Feet as close together as possible. Obviously a 10 most of the time is going to be scored higher than a 5, but it also depends on where it's performed in the wave, how critical it is. A perched type 5 is going to score higher than a cheater 5, obviously. Keeping your feet closer together is going to score better. Keeping the arms quiet also. You want to keep your upper body quiet when you're on the nose. Not a lot of arms flailing around and stuff like that. You want to keep your body controlled. It's some of the things we're looking for.
Dave, you're muted.
Yeah, you're muted.
Apologize. Yeah, like, so what we were talking about, going back to the cheater 5. So even with, you might have a nice critical spot on the wave where your wave is like, here's one right here. But so that's a nice little placement of the 5. But imagine the back foot being back further and the front leg is just super stretched out. Even if you're in a great position on the wave, a very critical spot, it's a low scoring wave. And I think we do have picture. There it is right there. Like, that is a super stretched 5 compared to the other 5s that we saw. That does not score as high. So it's just definitely something to look at. And, you know, we can go back to the criteria and talk some about that. But reality is, when you're judging these events and you're looking at longboarding, and this is something that Brando and I have taken, you know, a long time, and Brando's definitely a specialist in this area. It's it's the nuances, and that's extremely important in longboard. And it's a different beast than shortboarding and watching somebody just pop off into the pocket and seeing the power. And that's one thing I think about longboarding that's beautiful, is that it's so different in its ways. Everybody's going to get to the nose in a different way. Footwork, placement, on how they cross step, not shuffling back, and just being, and it all flows. And so when you look at this longboard criteria, it's variety, the speed, power, and flow, the commitment, the control is huge. Style, the footwork, all these things come into one. And to judge that, it's really can be tough sometimes. But when you get to watch it, really pick nose ridings apart, how the foot is, where the foot placements are, when they're cross step and they go back to the tail. And this is one thing that Brandon and I went and did the Longboard Pro in Puerto Rico, the Rincon Surf Fest. And that was one thing. One of our ESA competitors from the past, Parker Sawyer, was surfing. And one thing that helped him move through his heats is when he was cross-stepping back, as soon as his back foot hit the tail, he was already initiating the rail turn. And those are the parts of the control that everybody's looking for. So if you get into a heat where everybody can nose ride, how are you going to separate those scores? And that's something, Brando, that was just going over the levitation. And I think that's, to me, is an amazing thing to see the board, like when they're getting on the nose and the board lifts up kind of like this. And that means you're gaining speed across. So that, like this. And Brando, you described that perfect. I'll let you go into that with seeing the air under the board and so on.
Yeah, you just want to, I mean, it shows you they're really putting it all on the line. That's full commitment right there. The arms are down. There's air underneath the nose of the board, and both toes or both feet are right there on the nose. Toes are over. It's committed. It's critical. You know, you can see air underneath the board. It's not on the flats of the wave, engaged with the flats. It's the tail's being held down by the wave, and that's the commitment that we're looking for right there.
So what would be a score between this with the air under the nose of the board versus, like you said, if she was still in the flat of the wave?
Well, there's a lot that you can take into it that are going to factor in how long she's up there, foot placement, how far stretched it is, criticalness of it. It all, like Dave was saying, the longboard stuff is so, there's so many intricacies that you have to break down. All the criteria from the shortboard stuff it applies, but we also have a whole nother end of the board, and we really critique where your feet are at. And but that photo right there, that's right in the pocket. That's a good illustration of where we want to see the board placed.
That would probably be an excellent ride. If that was just on the ride based of somebody riding straight at us in the mushy section, which would be maybe a 2.5 or a 3. And this right here is definitely excellent.
And also with that, this could be a hang 5, and it could still score better than a 10 that's not quite as critical. We see a lot of times in subpar conditions, somebody will hang 10, but it's going straight towards the beach or in the flats. And you got to be careful not to get fooled by that, because a 10 doesn't always outscore a 5. A good 5 in a critical spot and in the pocket, it can beat a not very critical hang 10. So it's not always so clear cut, you know?
Yep. And, also talking about completion. I mean, if you hold the ride and you're on the nose, if you do not get back to show that you completed, that's not a successful nose ride either. And your scores don't get deducted, but it's incomplete.
Yeah, you've got to walk away from it and ride it out. Doesn't matter how long you're up there, how cool it looked. If you don't complete it, it's not going to get scored. So. Yeah.
And how we could tell when somebody's losing speed on the nose ride is the board will kind of drop down to the bottom. As they're riding, they kind of drop into the bottom, and that shows they're losing speed. But again, It's important with the levitation, because once that board locks in, or in the critical spot, as Brando was pointing out, that lift, the air under the board comes up, and there's levitation that happens. It just rises, and that means they're hitting full max speed, and that goes into the speed and power and the control. And those are the things that are the nuances in longboarding, which make it amazing, and so on. And and you could still do rail turns and put a whole link of ride together, and I think that's something that's huge. You can plant your foot like a shortboard and just kind of cutbacks and different. But if you're cross stepping and initiating those, and then back into it, and putting the board placement and reading the wave with the board and how your feet are moving, I mean, those are going to score higher than you just going like a shortboard wraps.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those are huge things. And hopefully in the future we'll have videos to kind of show those things, what we're looking for. But that is really it. It's an amazing thing. I've seen a couple really good comps of longboarders, and it's amazing when you start breaking apart their styles. It's like, I don't know, I'm going to name some people. It's like, oh, how do I like Miles Davis today, or do I like John Coltrane? I don't know. Both different styles, both experts. How do you differentiate that? And that is where the nuances again are in longboarding. The nose ride. How is the nose ride done? The placement. I've seen people in the nose, literally in the nose ride, shift feet. Like just those little things, which can happen even on the East Coast. It doesn't have to be a point break. I see it. Actually, I've seen it here more on the East Coast. So it's an amazing.
So let's talk about surfing on the East Coast.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the waves that the majority of the people who are watching this are going to be judging.
Yeah.
And that's the kind that we see at our local events, that are the knee-high, wind-driven, not much to go on. So
like you say, Michelle, it's easy to on a point break to pick a nice high line on the wave and get a long sustained nose ride. But on the East Coast, it can be shifty and junky, and it takes a lot of skill to figure out where and when to run up to the nose and run back, and you have to do it quick, and you have to respond to these immediate changes.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of one. Like, one thing I think with the East Coast we see a lot of, and I like this, and I think it's a beautiful approach, is it'll look like the surfer is taking off the opposite direction of the wave. So if the wave is breaking right, they'll take off left and fade, or instantly go to the nose. And I think on the East Coast we see a lot of that, because we have such a shorter wave that everybody's approach is to get there real fast. And I think those are some of the great things about what we have here. And even, Brando, let's talk about this one. Somebody hitting on the inside. Like, I mean, a lot of people are like, well, that's a turn. How do you do that? But that's still a reward, right? Somebody banking it in re-entry.
That was one of the things I kind of want to touch on, is I feel like the turning aspect of the whole criteria has almost gotten lost on a lot of the competitors and stuff. We are focused on the nose ride, but the board's got two ends, and the beach break conditions that we have here on the East Coast, there's a lot of opportunity to do tail turns, big turns off the tail. It still needs to be performed in a traditional longboard manner, but you can still do a big powerful turn. And I think a lot of the conditions that we have here, what scores high is a combo of a good critical nose ride off the takeoff, and then a big hit off the white water, or a big drop knee cut back like that. Some kind of variety, not just go to the nose, get off, wait for the next section, get back up on the nose. And I see some of the guys just all nose ride, but nose to tail, rail to rail. I mean, use the whole board and score the guys that can do both, because it's hard to turn those big boards, and sometimes it doesn't get rewarded as much as it should, I feel like. But like, I remember one of the Groms, I can't remember his name, at Easterns this last year, I believe he got like a 7 on one big turn out the back. It was that day that was like 6 feet and clean, and he did one big vertical smash, and I think he got like a 7 on it, if I recall correctly, for one big turn. And those conditions called for that. I mean, super hard to get on the nose that day. It was big, almost barreling, and we rewarded them for the one big turn based on the conditions. So I think that gets lost nowadays. We're heavy on the nose rides, but we want to see a combination and a variety of variety of maneuvers. And there's a variety of turns you can do on a longboard. You're not going to do an air, but you've got a variety of cutbacks. Just for example, you can do, shortboard, you just do a roundhouse. That's all you got. You do a roundhouse on a longboard, you can do a layback cutback, drop knee cutback, cross step cutback. There's a lot more variety.
Brandon,
I appreciate the turns.
You talk a lot about, how competitive longboarding has gone from being a progressive approach to a blend of progressive and traditional, and with a slightly heavier emphasis on traditional in the last couple of years. How did the WSL migrate to that criteria?
I'm not real sure how they came about that. I think that's been in the works for 20 years. There's been guys on one side pushing for traditional only, and then there's been guys on the other side that say, let us surf however we want to surf. And there's been the single fin versus the 2+1s and stuff. And I think it's just where we've come to right now as a longboard community. Everybody's going traditional. Single fins are cool, but that's another thing I wanted to touch on too, is it doesn't matter how many fins you have on the board. That's another East Coast thing. We have a lot of conditions that are good for a 2+1, and we're not gonna score differently based on how many fins are on the board. We want to see you ride the board in a traditional longboard manner. Don't care what's on the bottom of it, as long as you got a clean style, nose ride and turn. But as far as where they've come with that, I think they've just had some people behind the scenes pushing them in that direction for a long time. I think it's the right way to go.
Mm-hmm. So they're going to reward for a blend of both traditional and progressive, as long as it's executed well.
Yeah, and like Dave was touching on, they want to see the guys on the rail. Like back to the cutbacks, you go to do a roundhouse cutback, you get back to the whitewater. We don't want to see the board lifted and placed onto the whitewater. We want to see the rail still engaged and driving out of the whitewater. Like a full rail engaged turn is going to score better than half cutback and kind of lifting it.
So commitment, risk, putting it on the line.
Yep, exactly. It's like I was saying, all the shortboard criteria as far as turns still applies. We want to see a big, powerful rail turn if you have it, but we're still heavy emphasis on the other end of the board, the nose riding. We'll see a good combo of both.
Yeah. Is it fair to say too, what you're doing to get to those two turns? If you're going to transition from the nose to the turn, it's the foot placement, the cross step,
100%.
how you get there. And I think that's where the traditional is emphasized massively on that.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. And
cross-stepping, no shuffling, clean footwork, clean transitions from turn to nose ride and so forth. Yeah.
So Brando, I know we called some, we kind of come up with our own names on things. So explain like what you, well, we won't go into that.
I know where you're going.
Yeah. But let's start off first with drop knee, and what a lot of people seem to confuse sometimes with a drop knee and what we're calling the cross step cutback.
Yeah, that's like I was saying, there's the variety in the cutbacks that you have to choose from. The cross step cutback, reverse drop knee is exactly what it's a cross step cutback. You cross your feet and do a cutback. We still score it, but we consider it a cross step cutback. And that's coming right out of the mouth of the head judge of the Longboard World Tour for the WSL. He's calling it a cross step cutback, not a reverse drop knee. And I agree with him 100%. Drop knee cutback is a drop knee cutback. Cross step cutback is a cross step cutback. It's functional, but it's not going to score you any extra points. I wouldn't, you know what I mean? I think I would rather see a traditional drop knee turn than the cross step turn most of the time, unless you're just trying to mix it up. But it is a stylish way to do a turn. It's just, I would put it more in the trick category than, I'd rather see a drop knee turn or a roundhouse or a big, powerful cutback than the finesse cross step cutback, personally.
More of a functional turn.
Yeah, and it
like you
does
said,
have function, but not as much as the rest of them.
Yeah. And so now let's get us into some other things that I think I see a lot, and I know you have at comps, spinners, people doing 360s on the board, like not, saying, but again, what we want to do is this is not made to criticize anybody's style or anything. What we want to talk about is basically what, as a judge, I think sometimes we believe that these are things that people believe score high in longboarding. And I really want to make sure that, we're clear on this and cover these things because we do see them a lot. And I think people are kind of shocked when they do not get the scores that they were hoping to get out of those. And one of them we'll start off with is the spinner. So, just spinning on the board.
I mean, I could see them getting some points back in the 60s and 70s, but it's kind of, we consider it a trick. Back to the, there's no function to it. It's just a trick. Now, granted, if there's two people in the heat and one guy's going straight to the beach and one guy's going straight to the beach and doing spinners, the guy doing the spinners is probably going to beat the guy going straight. But we're not going to, I don't want to say it's frowned upon. It's not going to detract from your score at all, but it's not a functional scoring maneuver. It's kind of just like a spinner. I would consider it like a cherry on top, or just a little kind of like, I don't know. How would you put
It's
that?
hard to say. Yeah, it's not something that let's say this.
We're not looking for
the wow factor.
Right.
And I think that's a better way to say it. Michelle, I don't know if you can pull this up, but we have one picture of a guy going to heels on a nose ride. And I think this will lead us into the next thing, which is also kind of a spinner. A lot of people have been getting to the nose and thinking they're doing heel rides and then coming back. And we kind of came up with our own name for that. We call it the catwalk, like modeling, like you're basically walking up to the nose and then flicking back and then walking back to the center of the board. And we just want to make it clear that there's a difference with that. That is still great, looks nice. It's showing that you can have control of your footwork. But what we're really looking for is if somebody's going to hang heels and say they're getting heels, we want to see it locked in position. And I think we do have a pic that's going to come up soon.
Which one?
You'll see he's he's riding backwards on the nose.
Right there.
Yeah,
that's where all the points on those maneuvers is coming from. The actual heels, the walking back is just a little bit of a bonus, but we're breaking down the actual hanging heels right there of the maneuver. It's like you said, when they're walking back, the catwalk is more just a glorified spinner. But if they do it after hanging heels and locking it in like that, it's going to get a good score because of the heels.
Yeah, and that's important to lock it. And I think that's the difference of the spinner on the nose, catwalk, or locking the heels. And that's
a lot of guys will go straight up and just barely touch the nose and immediately turn around and walk back as if that was the maneuver. And we're gonna score you higher if you just stay on the nose up there longer or hang the heels.
Hey guys, real quick, there is a question from someone. Can you explain a drop knee cutback? A drop knee cutback.
I think we have a good photo of a drop knee cutback.
Yeah, go back.
Yeah.
It's pretty self-explanatory. Drop your knee. There you go.
That one?
Yeah, back knees drop. That one too. That's Tony. You're really on the balls of your toes right there. Your back toes. Your heel's not even engaged on the board when you're doing that turn. It's all toes and the back foot. but you can really pivot the board and whip it around fast in a drop knee, traditional turn. It's just easier to get a big board around and drop the knee.
So with that, talking about, again, back to the East Coast, back to our district contests. There's not a lot of hanging 10. There's not a lot of hanging 5s. So what is the best criteria for our amateur judges to judge these longboarders on?
Start looking at turns. And I mean, if you really want to get to the bottom and start up, if you got to go to length of ride, then start. We don't do it. We don't like to emphasize length of ride, but if you get down to the bottom and it's just people beginning and that's all you've got to deal with, whoever's riding it longest, if somebody can turn, if somebody does a maneuver, any kind of maneuver is going to outscore just going straight or just down the line. So any kind of completed maneuver from the bottom up is where we start looking. And then from there, footwork, if they can cross step and still not necessarily get to the nose, but they have some clean footwork and get halfway, in the middle of the board and back, that's going to be better than just standing there,
No shuffling, but cross.
No shuffling, yeah.
Cross,
Right.
cross
Lots of footwork.
Yep. And the
Footwork,
position
yes.
of the board too. It's like positioning the board in the wave, like trying to get the critical spot of the wave to get that power. Those are other things that we look for. And again, I think what I see the most of is if somebody's truly attempting, like Brando's saying, length of ride or just going straight, if that's what we're seeing an average of in the heat at the level, then if somebody completes a couple cross steps, we have to open up the criteria a little bit to reward for basically starting to tap in to the traditional riding, and that's huge. And that's, as a judge, is and I think Gordon last week was explaining that every condition changes, and we have to make those decisions as each heat changes, the wave conditions change, everything happens. And we really, sometimes you can have this level of surfers in the heat, and then the criteria gets tighter. And then sometimes you have this going on and maybe all the waves start to look the same. And then one person does that little teeny flavor, and that's when we have to lift our scores a little bit. And that's just part of judging. And we wish we could say it was a perfect thing, but the reality is that just recognizing, again, the word nuances and difference, and rewarding that tad of traditional surfing and longboarding is what you need to look for. And I think you were great with that, Brando, starting from the bottom. Like, hey, if this is what we're seeing, you just work your way up. And if you start seeing that, so you leave yourself room. If you're starting to see some turns and you're like, oh, okay, this is a 4, 5, and 5 because everybody else is going straight, and maybe we're in the 2 ranges. But then all of a sudden, some turns, and then one person cross steps and then finishes a turn. Now we can slowly increment up a little bit. Yeah. And then if somebody goes to the nose and does both of those, which we love to see, we love combos and all that. And then once somebody does that, now we can even open up to an 8. And that's what the beautiful thing about the scale is. There's 100 points, yeah. Or 99 literally, because it's 0 to 10. And you can use all of those to create a scale. No wave's ever the same. And again, like we talked about last week, you start off with half and wholes, and this brings the judges close and tight together. And then you can just start opening up. You have a benchmark, which we described last week. The benchmark is like, hey, this is what we saw. This is our 4. And then we start asking ourselves, well, was that better or was it worse? How bad was it compared to that? Or how much better was it? And here we are again, looking at this on the scale. If you can scroll down a little bit, Michelle.
Yeah, I wanted to pull this back up because that was a good, is this what you want to see?
Yeah, and just, you get to see the rides here. Like there's a 4, 5 or a 5, and you can start opening. And one thing you start to kind of, and this is, Brando's an excellent head judge also. And just working with him, I mean, he just really is able to really bring the panel in tight. And the one things that we will talk about sometimes, it's like, all right, that was a 2.5. Did you think it was, and these are things, did you think it was twice as good as that 2.5? And if it was, well, there's your score. There's your 5. And those are the things that we start to kind of, you start to work out your own system as a judge. Curt Page is another longboard judge that works out in Malibu, does all those comps. And again, he loves to talk about that. He would love to write a book, what goes through a judge's mind as he throws a score or her score. It's because, I mean, it's 1,000 things going through at once. And the more experience you have and you sit down in that chair, I mean, I learn to this day every time I sit down. And you have to have that open mind approach. And together as a team, you can work through that. It's not and I know I'm kind of going off a tangent a little bit, but when I first started judging, everybody was like, have confidence in your scoring. And I think sometimes that word confidence can be misconstrued like, well, I'm sticking to my 4 or 5. That's what I like. And that's the way I'm going to be. When everybody else is maybe at a 7 or a 7.5. And it's, again, you got to work together as a team. And I think that's the most important part. And the head judge is, again, like I said, the orchestra. And he's there to compose and bring everybody tight together. We're not telling you to change your score. And we've seen this before. Like if somebody throws a 5 and everybody else has a 7.5, all of a sudden we're talking about, and then they change their score to an 8. Well, don't change your score to an 8. Still be the low guy. You could still be a 6. And that just brings the average down. Hold your opinion. Be confident in the scores that you're throwing, but work within the team. And that's what's needed. It's kind of like a vote. If you're on a panel with 5 and 4 of them see it at this, and you're that guy that sees it completely different, I'm sorry. It's a vote. And, still be the low person. Don't jump above the score. Still be the low person. And you can still hold that and hold your opinion, which will bring the average down. And that's, again, what we're there to do. And so the word confidence is in throwing your score. Hey, it's that old game. Pick a number 1 through 10, and you might have it in your head already. And it's usually right if you guess the first number. That's scoring. That's judging. Trust is confidence. Sorry, but that was my ramble on throwing some scores. Yeah. So, Brando, going back into some of the moves, fin first, takeoffs.
That's another one of those that we kind of consider a trick. Again, if you've got 2 equal waves and one guy does a fin first and the other guy doesn't, the fin first is going to get maybe an extra half a point or something. We'll throw them, but it's kind of there with a spinner. I mean, if somebody does it at, say, Jeanette's Pier on a 6-foot wave and takes off on a longboard, does a fin first, that's a little more consequential, and there's more at risk, so you might get a little bit more for it. But we want to see big maneuvers, not tricks. Not that we're knocking the fin first, but it's not going to amount to much on the scorecard.
Michelle, do you happen to have the video of an Easterns? It was a while back that we brought up. It was an incomplete. We're going to watch this wave.
Is it up for you guys to see it?
Yeah.
Yes.
And we'd love to watch this. And we can even talk about this maneuver that happens here. But let's go ahead and watch this.
Baggage, body baggage.
I can mute it.
I meant to do that.
So, and if we could play that again, this was a wave that the crowd saw different than the judges.
Oh, I want to do it with the announcers this time because.
Okay. Give me a quick sec. This reminds me a lot of that wave that Kelly Slater had a long time ago. What was it? The 4.17?
The wave it lowers?
Yeah. So it caused, that should have been a 10. And this is something that we'll talk about. We'll go ahead with the announcers.
Baggage, pick up some trash and get a coupon for a free meal. Bag it. Bag it. Body bag it. Here's yellow. Fades right. Comes back left. Runs to the nose. Goes for this head. Oh, he's not climbing. He goes to the coffin. Stand up, Chase.
Okay, now this is something I want to talk about before we get into the actual maneuvers and the ride itself. We heard the excitement of the announcers. This is so important as a judge. Do not let stuff like that influence you. That's not what you're there to do, is be influenced by others. This is strictly your job to make a differentiate between what is going on in the water and seeing it. It is your eyes and your panel and your team's eyes that are initially going to make the call for this. And again, do not listen. I mean, everybody on the beach can cheer, clap, and go wild. But at the end of the day, Brando, what do you think about that wave?
It's incomplete. I mean, I remember that wave very vividly, sitting on the panel for that. If he hadn't fallen on to his backside, it would have been a pretty good score, because he had a nice nose ride going there. And, that helicopter maneuver, that's been around since the mid-90s. And if you got a long nose ride, and instead of walking it out, you've got that long nose ride and you do a helicopter to finish it off, we'll give you a little bonus, but it's also kind of a trick. But that particular maneuver there, he fell to his butt. At that point, we deem that a loss of control. Not necessarily incomplete, because they said he went to a coffin. He fell and went to his butt and then got back up. So that was reflected in the score. It was a loss of control, basically.
Yeah. And how can you tell that it wasn't a coffin compared to a fall? And that's again, telling the difference. You can try to play it off, but when you watch his body go, he goes back on his heel.
Yeah, it was out of control, and even if he did a coffin on purpose, we're not going to score a coffin either. So
that's right. Yes. Thank you, Michelle, for that.
Again, it goes back to control.
It's control. Yeah.
And even the nose rides, the poise of the body, hands by the side, control, not flailing. I've worked and I have to tell you, we work with a lot of talented judges on the East Coast, and when we do the WSL, but there's very few and far that really get the longboard tour and how the longboard criteria work. One was Travis William. He was a mentor of mine for that. Chris Burnett is excellent, and definitely Brando. And I think it's something special to be a part of, again, because I mean, there's such a beauty in longboard, and it's such a beautiful approach to surfing and the control of a board. And I get excited about it. I do. And I know Brando does too. And I thought it was really great bringing up the 2+1, Brando, and about the fins and everything, because that's the one thing we hear before, like, well, I mean, do I get scored higher if I'm riding a single fin? They shouldn't be out there with the 2+1. And at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. And
No.
You have to be smart with choosing your board and conditions. Heavier boards to lighter nose boards. Tony Savani's the perfect example of that. He'll break out lighter boards and beach break conditions because he's able. And I mean, I'm a board builder. Brando's a board builder, and what do you think about that, Brando? So let's talk in, because I think longboarding is kind of a board thing too. It's like the choice of your board and your approach for the conditions.
Absolutely.
Do you want a lighter board in shore break conditions?
Brandon, you showed us a video of you riding a 4-fin longboard, and
Right.
maybe you could talk a little bit about where that would have been an advantage.
That board was just a bit of a novelty. I don't know if there really is much of an advantage to the quad longboards, other than you get a little extra burst of speed when it's small, but you can't really perch on them as much. They hang 5 really well, but you can't get that levitation on a good 10.
Yeah.
We really want. But I just borrowed that one out of the shop I was using. But when I was competing professionally, I had 3 longboards that I'd take to every contest, and it would depend on the conditions. I had a heavy single fin log, I had an all-around rounded pin 2+1, and then I had a little 9-1 high-performance longboard. If it was big, I'd ride the high-performance longboard. Most of the time, I'd ride the all-arounder, because back then it wasn't. I'm talking 1999, 2000, 2001. It wasn't so heavily traditional. Only it was 50-50. So you get away with the 2+1s and more turning and stuff like that. And then most of the time on the East Coast, if it's small, if it's stomach high and under and clean, you bust out the big heavy single fin log, and that's where you're going to get your nice nose rides and perched 5s and 10s and that levitation and stuff.
Yeah, and with the logs, you can get some good nose rides even in East Coast conditions.
Yeah, it's as long as it's not, you don't want to bust out the log if it's starting to get hollow at all. It's more of a small wave thing, but I was always big on, match the equipment for the conditions, and that really applies to the longboard, because you don't want to, if it's 6 feet and windy, you don't want to take out a big heavy log. You're going to be at a disadvantage. You're just going to be holding on, and bucking bronco. So you want to board that a little bit lighter, a little thinner, that can, more modern rail that can handle that. The whole thing with the side bites, some people say, they're training wheels or whatever, and that it's easier to nose ride on the board with side bites. I don't believe that one bit, because if you ask me, a heavy single fin log is a heck of a lot easier to nose ride than a high performance longboard. Now, if you take that same log with the big heavy single fin and you put 2 side bites on it, and then you'd be a lot easier, but nobody's doing that. So it depends on the conditions. Small waves, ride the heavy single fin log. Contests, I always like to have an in-between where you could kind of do a little bit of both. But then if I'm going to Hatteras and it's 6 feet and it's barreling, I'm gonna break out the 2+1 9-0 rounded pin. You can still get on the nose, but you're not going to be handicapped by all that extra foam and weight. Still do a turn.
And this leads up to one of our questions and answers Q&A ones here. It says, do judges appreciate when longboard competitors do not wear a leash?
Yes, but it doesn't reflect in your score.
That's
but
right.
We do appreciate it.
But it doesn't. Yeah, but it doesn't change your score.
It doesn't change your score, but yeah, we notice it. But it's not gonna. It doesn't reflect in your score.
Yeah.
And if it's big, put a leash on. We're not gonna. It's not gonna detract from your score if you have a leash on. That's for sure. We're not. It's not gonna make a difference in your score either way.
You have a 15-minute heat. You lose your board. It's kind of big. Now you wasted 10 minutes going in to grab it and then trying to get back out to the outside.
Exactly. So.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Yep. And then here's another question, and I think we just go ahead and open up to any Q&As for everybody. What is a reentry worth, if anything?
Depends on the reentry and the conditions.
Yep.
I mean, there's a lot of different reentries. You can do a horizontal reentry, or you can hit it vertically, and the vertical is going to score better than the horizontal all day long.
Even the longboarders in the 60s were trying to turn as hard as they could. They were trying to push the limits, and they were just restricted by their equipment. So a well-executed turn off the lip reentry that flows into the next move and is on a wave where there's a variety of moves, it's going to add to the score line.
Absolutely. Well, again, back to the Grom last Easterns, I got a 7 for one big turn. It's dependent on the conditions. Those conditions asked for it. He was the only one that had the guts to do that turn in those conditions, and we rewarded him for it. So it depends on the conditions.
And we had even bring up Jason, competed in the longboard last year, Moats, big turns that he got rewarded. They were in the 5 ranges to 6.5s because they were super strong. But we also had a couple people in the same heat that were getting to the nose that if they were able to complete those, they just weren't able to get back. But if they were able to complete those nose rides and where they were located in that critical spot, and I remember because it was a couple lefts coming through, and if they were able to get back, because we talked about it, that would have been the scores to beat it. Those would have been the 7.5s, maybe an 8 that would have
Yeah.
beat it. But the fact that those weren't complete. So sometimes in nose riding, you want to hold and you're just like, I'm going to hold this nose ride. Oh, I'm just going to do it. But sometimes it's just get back, get the score.
Yeah. Walk it out.
Yep. So let's see if we got any more questions, but this is the time to open it up. What would constitute a 7.5 with the number of moves? So we just kind of went into that a little bit.
Thanks, Cassidy.
Yep. So I think with that being said, again, Brando talking about this big turn, and it's, again, we're going to look at the day, the conditions, what's happening in the heats and the previous heats, if they're similar. One thing with the WSL, when we work at those levels, we really are not switching age groups. So the competitors, we kind of hold the same criteria throughout the same day. The conditions might vary, but it's the same criteria. But if we're judging mini hunis or like 14 and adults, we have to kind of switch up those criteria. So along with looking at wave conditions and the changing throughout the day, we're also looking at basically the age groups that are out there and their skill level. And so those 7.5s can vary. But again, I think for me, I love to see variety. And if I could paint a perfect wave, it would be a nice fade, takeoff, pulling it back around, boo, 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 right to the nose in a critical spot, come out maybe a stretch 5, back to a 10, boom, boom, to the middle of the board, plant, back wrap, and the whole combo, re-entry finish. 7.5, 8, all done in style. But again, it's always going to change. And we go back to the criteria and scores. You have to decide where that score is going to lie compared to your earlier scores that you have thrown. Was that 3 times better than that 2.5 that we saw? Man, I really like that. Was that excellent surfing? Well, if it's an excellent surfing, it's in the 8 range. And again, the confidence to get your score down fast and be ready. And again, work with your team. I mean, the team, it's so massive to work with your team.
And like you're saying, when you go to throw your score, your first instinct, that first number that pops in your head is usually right on the money. When you really start to think about it and overanalyze it and change your score, 9 times out of 10, that first number you had in your head was the right number that you should have stuck with. So just like Dave was saying, just be confident with it and go with your gut. That first number is usually it. You can always change it a little bit if you need to, and then working with the team is absolutely critical. It's not an individual thing, it's a team. So there's no real room for ego on the panel.
Yes, and working with a head judge and working with computer scoring will definitely improve your judging consistency. And both cases, it'll keep you within a range, and it'll be it's training in progress.
For sure.
100%. And here we have another question, Brando. Is wave difficulty a good parameter for a higher score?
Well, the more difficult the wave, I mean, the more potential you have to score higher. We score on degree of difficulty and commitment. So if you've got a wave that has no degree of difficulty at all, and the wave that does, it's got more potential, but it depends on how it's ridden, obviously, and the maneuvers performed. There's no clear cut. Here's what you got to do to get a 7.5. It depends on the conditions, the day. Each wave is compared to the next wave, so it depends what a 5 had looked like the previous heat, what a 7.5 is going to look like. It's all there's no blueprint to like, okay, if you get a nose ride in the hit, that's going to be a 7.5 every time. It depends. Depends on the conditions. It's all condition dependent. The longboard stuff it really is.
And with a long nose ride or short nose ride with turns after, with a long nose ride or short nose ride with a turn afterwards, score better. And I think it goes back to a critical type thing where the placement of the nose ride. But go ahead, Brando.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. It depends on where the nose ride was, where the feet were, how the body's out of control, or if the hands are flailing around, or if they're nice and tight to the body, and it depends on the turn. You know, there's a difference in turns, like we were saying earlier, between a lift turn that's kind of just placed up there, or a windshield wiper, versus engaging the rail. So we want the nose rides to be critical, and we want the turns to be on rail. And there's just no getting around that, really.
Yeah. And here's a good one. How long will I be an apprentice judge? Will I always be coached by the head judge?
Yes, you will always be coached by the head judge.
Always.
Judging surfing is no different than riding waves and surfing itself. You'll never perfect it, and there's always room to improve and learn, and you just got to keep your mind open. You want to get better at judging, keep an open mind, no ego, and just keep your mouth closed and be part of the team and study surfing.
Yep. Gordon came up with a good name for that on Bill Seitz, Brando. They called it Surf IQ. And I like it.
Do your homework, you know?
Yep. So there's something that maybe I don't see any questions anymore, but I'd like to try to finish this off about longboarding. Longboarding, what a special crew of people. There's love, there's the soul about it. I mean, it's just there's a bond and connection. It's a smaller core group. I went and did the Longboard Pro in New York, and I thought something that was interesting because on our panel, and I know you saw this when Joel Tudor and gosh, who was he in the heat with when he jumped off on the board? They switched boards.
Gosh, put me on the spot.
Yeah, I can't remember the guy's name, but I'm going to tell you right now what was
Connie Stewart.
Probably so. Yeah. And now this is the interesting thing about that is everybody on the beach again exploded, cheered, applaud, and as a judge, you can't stand up and applaud, even though it was one of the cool things to see. It was like, wow, that's pretty cool. What camaraderie, what amazing, excellent, just the brother sisterhood of longboarding and all this coming together for this one moment. And you know what we did? That was an interference. So we had to give them an interference. They weren't allowed to switch boards or touch others' equipment. And he snaked them and did that. So as a judge, it's something that I'm just trying to explain. It's professionalism. Wouldn't it be great to be in the crowd and cheer and applaud? But as a judge, you have to remove yourself from all that scenario and do what's right. Know the rule books, know everything, and understand that, because believe me, everybody even on the scaffolding with us, besides the judges, all stood up and applaud. And the judges did not, and we had to throw in interference and make those decisions. And hey, you want to give them a 10 because it was so awesome, but at the end of the day, it's surfing and it's competition. So don't take it personal, and it's just a beautiful thing. Anyways.
Hey, Ron has a question over in the chat. He wants you to explain the square tail versus the round and where to be used.
Brando.
It's a personal preference thing. A squash or a square tail is going to have more of a pivot point in your turns, where your turn will have a breaking point, where a rounded pin is going to be more fluid transition from rail to rail because there's no break point between the two. It just goes right from one rail to the other. The rounded pins, again, it's personal preference. I preferred the rounded pin when the waves got a little bit bigger. I prefer a squash when it's smaller. I like a squash on my log, but I know a lot of guys that like a big round pintail on their logs too. It's just it's a personal preference. I think the East Coast, the big wide piggy tails don't work as well. They work good in California on the point breaks and stuff, but the waves we have here, I think you're better off not so hippie and a more pulled in squash, a little bit straighter outline to fit the pockets and the curves of the smaller wind driven waves that we have here. They're not so extended out. The pig shapes and those big hippie pintails work a little bit better, like California waves, a little more push, I know they're popular, and that's might be an unpopular opinion, but they just don't work as good. The little more straighter, hippier squash, I think, is your best East Coast bet for a nose rider longboard. Just my personal opinion.
That's great. And there's one more question from Kylie. What are the pros and cons of 50-50 rails?
That's also a personal preference. For example, I can't stand them. I feel like I'm tipping on them. My brother loves them. He kills it on 50-50 rails. So it's just how you surf, how you want to surf, and how that feels. If it feels comfortable under your feet, it's completely personal preference. The 50-50 rail is a more traditional rail, but I mean, we've got a modern rail too that works pretty dang good. So I like the tucked rail with a little edge, a little turn down. I just think it works a little bit better out here. In the East Coast conditions, it's a little more versatile. The 50-50 rail, it's going to limit you to more smaller conditions. Once it gets over, say, stomach high, you're going to be a little bit limited with the 50-50 rails. Not to say they don't work. It's just a definitely more traditional style of surfing. I find them tippy. So I like a little tuck.
Right on.
All right. Well, I think that is it for the questions. Don't see any more in the chat, and I don't see any more coming through. So, but that was a lot of good information. It's interesting how the longboard has so many different variables to it compared to the shortboard. I mean, they both do, but the longboard seems to have a lot more technical.
Yeah, you got two ends of the board to deal with. So
basically, for those of us who are on here who are new to judging and who have probably never judged before and are going to step in this summer and volunteer for their local districts, maybe just a couple points. What should they be looking for? People to use, like you said, nose to tail, use the whole board.
Nose to tail, rail to rail, control.
Okay.
Especially control and style and clean footwork at the lower levels. Look for the people that can do clean cross stepping. They might not be getting all the way to the nose, but whoever's getting closest to the nose, the clean footwork, the maneuvers. Definitely look for any kind of little bank off the white water or a change of direction, anything to differentiate between just going straight, because somebody has to win, and that's your job as a judge, to break down every single one of those waves. Like Dave said, no wave should be scored the same. There shouldn't be a 2.5 and another 2.5, because there's no two waves that are the same. So even all the way down at the very bottom level of competitor, you got to find something to see who's surfing better. There's got to be a first through fourth place, one way or the other. So
I think that's a very, very good comment right there.
And here's another question before we close out. How do I present myself as a judge on the beach? And I believe that means, how do I become a judge? I believe what that means. I kind of feel like you just have to show the interest. I think that's something besides maybe being pulled into it. But for me, it was something that I wanted to pursue, and I went down and talked to the other judges and showed interest and just made those steps to do so. And it's important. We talked about this other ones. We call it a shadow judge. See if they can give you a clipboard and a paper and stand behind the judge, or hopefully the head judge will let you come in the tent with them, and just throw your own scores and kind of sit back and listen and see what you can do that way. That's shadow judging, and you start to pick up a lot from that. Maybe become a spotter, help out spotting throughout the day. Come in, red's up, yellow, green, do these type of things, and you'll start to listen and be a part and hear key words that the head judge talks and the other judges talk about. And I think it's part of that, because we do have a lingo and everything comes together. But I think the most important is, if anything in life, if you want it, go get it. And so go up and talk to the judges, the head judge, the directors, especially, because, hey, we want you to come judge because we didn't get to where we are without doing it and putting in the time. And again, it's not natural. I don't know if all of y'all were tuned in before, but just to show you, I felt like flew by the seat of my pants the first time I judged. I was like, ooh, just because I think more based on surf IQ, knowing surfing, that I was able to throw some scores. But when I went to the pro level, I told this story probably the first class I think we did, where I talked about the head judge. One of the guys threw like a 5.5 or 6.5, and the head judge was like, at the pro level, was like, you like that wave better than that one earlier today? And it was like 4 or 5 hours ago. And the guy was like, yeah, I do like it better. And he's like, well, what color jersey was he wearing? Red. Was he goofy foot or regular foot? Oh, he was goofy foot. Was he on the backside, his backhand, or, front side wave? Oh, he's on his backhand. What did he do? And he was able to communicate and articulate everything about that wave, even though it was 4 or 5 hours ago. And to me, that is a practice. It's like a memory game, playing fish or so. Like, this thing is your strongest utensil in being a surf judge. And it's some people don't have the stamina to do it all day long. 10 hours on the beach, memory all day long. But if you go into that way as a judge, and I'm going to remember these waves. And again, we all have our own way of replaying it in our head. I've seen some judges, like, after the wave, just do this with their fingers, and that's how they're imprinted in their mind what it is. And that, I think that's the key factor, is recall is what we call it. And once you do that and establish those benchmarks, but as you begin to grow, start off with spotting, start off as a shadow judge, and then work your way into the seats. And it's up to the rest of the panel and the head judge to be patient, and we all work together a team. That is one thing about all the judges I worked with. All very brilliant people, very smart, very loving and caring, and we all want to work together as a team. And I think we get excited when we see other people that are interested in doing it. So reach out to your directors and the head judges and the other judges. That's what I would recommend.
Yes, and we can tell you guys are really enthusiastic about it, and we appreciate all that you guys do for the ESA, all the judges. Anybody on here who's watching who judges in our championship events and our local events, it's a lot. It's a lot of time. But those of you who are on this, who may be wanting to step up into your local district, you don't have to come out for 10 hours a day. You don't have to come out. You can come by and judge 1 or 2 heats, and just, we want you to engage yourself in it. We want you to step up and, help us out, but don't feel like it's a huge task for you to take on all at once, because it's not. We don't want that for you.
Yeah, 100%. And I think getting a flavor of, even if you sat down for 2 or 3 heats or so, I think even as a competitor, wow, hey, you get to see what we're looking at. You get a little confidence of what hey, these guys aren't here, or these people aren't here to hang me and do this, that we're being as fair as we can and talking about it. So you can pick up some key things to help your competitive surfing by sitting down on the panel. And that's massive. So those are something to do. Anything you'd like to finish off with, Branda?
No, just like you're saying, I think for competitors' sake, it's really beneficial to sit down and do some shadow judging. It'll make you a better competitor in the water. When you understand why we're putting the numbers to the waves, it'll sit down with us and judge a little bit, and when you get out into the water in your heat, it'll click a little bit up here. You'll understand where those points are coming from. It'll make you a better competitor.
Thank you, Brandon. That's really valuable information. So, and thank you for coming on tonight too.
Thanks for having me. Stoked.
Yeah, it was great having you here. And I want to invite everybody who's watching, please reach out to your district directors when they're able to start running some events again, and tell them that you took these courses and that you'd love to step in and shadow judge and help out, because I know a lot of our local districts need help with the judging. So with that, does anybody else have anything else to add? We'll let everybody go because it's getting late. But again, thank you. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, David. Thank you, Brandon, for
Thank
coming
you.
on.
Woo.
We all really appreciate all this useful information, and we're going to put it to good use as soon as we can start running some events again, which hopefully will be soon. But with that, we want to tell everybody, have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next week. We're not going to do our course on Monday because it's Memorial Day. So we've moved it to Wednesday, where we're going to be talking about everybody's favorite priority. And we're gonna, it's with the WSL and the ESA as well. So come on and register for that and join us this Thursday for another talking story with Wes Lane. So that'll be exciting with Jason Motes. And with that, everybody have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you later.
Excellent. Good night, everyone.
Later.